Hello and welcome to our session.
Hi, everyone. Great to have you here. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Kelly Arispe, and I'm an associate professor of Spanish. I'm a teacher educator and the program coordinator for our secondary education majors in French, German, and Spanish. And I'm at Boise State University.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Hoye, and I'm the director of the World Languages Resource Center at Boise State. And I come from an instructional design background, so I support all kinds of open projects, including the Pathways Project, a French curricular project, and then some different open initiatives at Boise State and in the state of Idaho.
Great.
And we thought we would give you a quick preview of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to give you a little review on what the literature says in terms of redistribution and K through 12 context, share a little bit about our project, the Pathways Project, to set the stage for the study that we completed this past spring and also in fall of 2022. And we'll share the results of that study with you. And I think most importantly, really try to focus on what we learned and how did we fix some of the barriers that we faced. What can we share with you to help you empower K through 12 teachers to share back? And we'd love to hear from you too in terms of your own ideas. To get us started, we thought it might be fun to have a little word cloud. And so we're going to ask you to share what comes to mind when you see the word redistribution. And Kelly, if you don't mind, will you paste that in chat? Awesome. All right. And one funny thing about this tool is if you don't hit submit, things will not show up on the screen. So make sure once you hit the up to 3, you hit submit. There we go. Awesome. Creative wealth. I love that idea of wealth. And I think of the keynote that we saw today too about just growing things and not even knowing the impact that you're going to have. But just like how exciting that feeling is. Commons, sharing. Equity. Awesome. All
All
right,
right.
with that, we are going to jump in and talk a little bit about redistribution.
Yeah, thanks. And just to piggyback off of what you were saying, Amber, I found the keynote to be so helpful in setting the stage for this presentation today. And there were a lot of really great metaphors too that were very optimistic and I think really grounding as to why we're all here. So I want to talk a little bit about the K through 12 challenges and in a sense give a little bit of a lit review so that we're all on the same page. Although I'm sure for those of you that are with us, this is a lived experience because we tend to get more of a smaller audience whenever we're talking about K through 12 practices and OER in these spaces. But what Amber and I have found is that when we gather and we present, we talk to you, it's a really rich discussion. And I think that it's really important as this reflects our identity and where we work in these spaces to talk about this and to be able to engage and share. So without further ado, we know that there's a lack of access to high quality educational resources, and this is a pretty clear challenge that has been addressed in the literature. Next point. I don't know if you've had the chance to read through the Bayview Analytics report that was just published, but it was really interesting to see that while there is an uptick in OER awareness, especially with higher education, 64% of faculty are aware of OER. Only 28% of K through 12 teachers share that same awareness. And we know that awareness doesn't actually equal use or engagement. And so really this is important. If we look at this next slide here too, we can see I borrowed this from the report. And I think the most important finding from this table really is that even though K through 12 teachers might be lacking in their awareness of what OER means, we know that their practice to create materials for the learning space is quite high. And so you can see here self-created activities, assessments, all types of materials for the classroom is at 77%. And so, of course, the question for us is really trying to figure out how do we get that awareness to grow? And especially so as to the keynote this morning, teachers aren't reinventing the wheel, but really they're engaging in adapting and remixing the materials that are out there. All right, so on the next slide, why aren't they as aware of, or maybe not using OER? We know that localizing and adapting OER is the biggest barrier. And yet, right, we also know that OEP has some really great advantages for the primary and secondary levels, but the lack of digital expertise is a big barrier that we're still encountering, and especially in the work that we're doing, we're going to be reporting on today that this tends to be one of the reasons why teachers aren't engaging, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then most teachers mentioned that the technical capacity to adapt OER is a concern, right? So they don't really know how to do that. And then finally, we still know that K through 12 teachers are suspicious of online materials. And so they're not aware of the OER licensing. They're not aware what they can do. And they're, especially in the field in which we work in language teaching and learning, this can often be related to not knowing if the materials are of high quality. And so all of these barriers are, of course, a threat to the long-term sustainability of OER use and open pedagogy, specifically in the K through 12 realm. But really, the thing that I think is important for the work that we do in the Pathways Project, which we're going to share with you in just a second, is the lack of empirical evidence for teacher OER reuse. TW Evans has written a fabulous article on darker use. If you haven't read it or you're not familiar, it's really helpful in talking about this. And so we know, again, referring back to the Bayview analytics, that teachers are sharing informally with colleagues, but not necessarily through open networks. And we really want to help change that, right?
So with that, before we get into the study and what we learned, we thought it'd be helpful to, again, give you a little information on what the Pathways Project is and a bit about our model. So the Pathways Project started in about 2018, which feels so long ago, but I can't believe we're already in almost in 2024. But it started as a way really to support teachers in our state that were going through standards and curriculum revisions and really feeling challenged and isolated. And since then, it's only continued to grow. And we're a group of not only language teachers, but we're also students, pre-service teachers, and that we work with in terms of our scope, we work with K through 16 teachers. So again, we have over 400 folks involved from all different positions, but I think what's really important is that everybody has an equally valuable role in our community, and that everyone learns from each other, and really we wouldn't be where we are without one of these 5 groups that you see here. So we have student OER editors which we'll explain here in a little bit. They help to really publish and polish the work that is being created by our pre-service teachers and in-service teachers, conversation assistants, who you can think of as like teaching assistants. They help to try these activities out with students, get feedback, and then implement that. Our pre-service teachers, we really think of as a bridge, and they're probably one of the key pieces here, because not only are they learning about OER in their work in the World Language Resource Center and in their education classes, but they're taking that and they're bringing it to their in-service teachers, and the in-service teachers who maybe aren't familiar with OER are learning about OER, but the in-service teachers are really bring a critical piece of, hey, let's work on like classroom management, or let's work on customizing this to meet the group of students that we're working with. And so it's a really kind of a symbiotic relationship. Both parties are really gaining a lot from that. And we have lots to offer. This could be a whole presentation in itself. So there's an article down at the bottom we have with Arodal that I'd invite you to check out. And we can probably link to that in the Oxford abstract too. But we have over 900 different openly licensed activities, and we're really focusing on ancillary activities. So we think textbooks are awesome, but we think that, and we know that K through 12 teachers really value the ancillary materials. And so we have this large collection in OER Commons, but we also have it available as a press book. And this is great for people who are new to OER or somebody who is maybe a first-year teacher who's looking for a full collection of activities. In addition to that, we have student projects. We offer lots of different professional development for pre-K through 16 teachers. And we have a new press book too that I will share with you at the end of this presentation that just came out this month that really works to help support teachers who want to, and I would say teacher educators as well, who want to adapt and adopt OER, but aren't really sure where to get started.
All right, so now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the study before we go into the results, and then share with you some of those resources and the implications for this work. So we're really interested in the OEP hypothesis, and by OEP here, we're referring to OER-enabled pedagogy, which specifically states that when teachers engage in these 5 Rs, which I'm pretty sure everyone here is familiar with, but when they're engaging in these 5 Rs and really engaging in not just the adoption, but also to the adaptation rather of the OER materials, that this transforms their pedagogy. So we're constantly thinking of how do we not only solve resource problems that K through 12 teachers have when they don't have textbooks or they need to norm to new standards, but also to how can we help support them in their content specific professional development needs. And that's what happens in this process. So we'll go to the next slide here and show you a little bit of the framework for this research project. We've been using the design-based research framework for a long time now. As you can see, we started piloting this through an exploratory phase in 2019. But what we're going to hone in on today is the last cycle, or the third and the fourth cycles of the DBR framework in 2022, and 2023. So we're going to be reporting on a 4-month study that was done with 16 teachers. So yeah, you can see here. Thanks, Amber. So the cohort had both synchronous and asynchronous components. And really what we did, Amber and I, we provided OEP professional development. And so we centered on those 5 Rs. And we had a cohort in the fall that was smaller of 6 teachers, and then a larger cohort in the spring with 10 teachers. And each cohort received 1 full day of synchronous professional development, again, where we focused on retaining and reusing these pathways project activities. And then we gave them an introduction to revise, remix, and redistribute. And then what we did is we focused 3 asynchronous and components or modules on those last 3, because we had found in exploratory cycles of the DBR that we had piloted with other teachers, that these were the hardest for teachers to really engage in. And so we wanted to slow it down, and we wanted to offer a month-long experience, mostly asynchronously, although there were a couple components at the end that were also synchronous, but they really focused on these last 3 Rs. And we, in terms of the analysis, we did pre and post focus groups with these teachers. We had monthly surveys. We did semi-structured interviews at the end with them. And then we actually analyzed their products, and we assessed them using a competence scale and a rubric that we're going to show you in just a second. On the next slide, you can see that while we had lots of research questions for this analysis, we presented the results from the questions that are not in the circle at other conferences, a lot of which are open, and you can find those results or read about those either in upcoming publications, or you can find those slides. We're happy to share that with you. But for the purposes of our time today, we're going to be focusing on the ones that are at the end here. Do teachers become proficient in OEP by the end of the program? And then what barriers get in the way and what do teachers gain? Because that's really where we're going with in terms of sustainability. We don't want these to just be one-off experiences where teachers learn about OER, but really they're invited to continue to engage, and they can do this work well. So on the next slide, Amber's going to go ahead and talk to you about the instruments. And we're again really pleased to be able to share these. These are open tools that we hope will support your work as you engage with the K-12 and really K through 16. This isn't just limited. This is the population with which we work most closely right now.
So after 2 cycles of working with teachers, Kelly and I really wanted to step back and reflect on 2 things. What were the barriers that instructors were facing? And then really, what skills do they need to engage in OEP, or the 5 R's? And so we came up with this kind of inverted pyramid. If anyone's familiar with language teaching, we use something very similar for proficiency. But the idea is that to move from retain to reuse, for example, it's not much of an ask, right? There's not that many skills that are needed to move up in terms of move up the ladder. But as we go, everything is scaffolded and builds upon the prior level, right? So in order to revise, I need to know how to retain and how to reuse. And so we started to map that out, and we really wanted to, at the end of the day, empower teachers to know how to discern, or how to decide when to employ each of these 5 R's, right? Sometimes it might make sense just to retain something. Sometimes it's going to make sense for them to revise and change it for their local context. And we hope that whenever they do that, right, that they're going to redistribute. But there might be times where they decide when they want to do that and when they don't. And so we created this graphic, and you'll see on the left, these are the barriers are little dots. And the idea is that the dots are kind of spread out through this inverted pyramid, meaning that this is something that isn't just like a one-time barrier. It's things that they're constantly facing and are persistent throughout each of the tiers. However, after completing the year-long cohort with the teachers, we found that there's really more below the surface. And I almost think of an iceberg. There's the things that we saw that were really easy to see and very evident. And then as we dug deeper and we formed relationships with these teachers, we discovered that there was so much more that we really hadn't thought about. Some of it, I think, came because of a result of the pandemic, but some of it were things that I think just weren't as clear to us. And one of the things, and Kelly's going to talk more about this, but one of the things that really stood out too was there's so much related to digital literacy and information literacy that I think before we maybe put into a bucket and we said, okay, you need to be digitally literate, or you need to have this information literacy. But I think Kelly and I have really started to pull that apart and say, okay, what does that mean? What are those skills? And for each of these 5 R's, what do you need to be able to do, right? And so with that, we said we need something a little bit better. So I'm going to let Kelly talk about what we created.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually share this too in the chat right now. So this is open. It's you're welcome and invited to use it. And we would love to know, if you do end up using it, how we can make it better. And we invite you to remix it for your own purposes. But this is a rubric that we developed. Of course, we remixed it thanks to ISKME and their work, as well as the Francophone International Organization. They had also some language in there that we were able to remix and combine. And so what you can see here is that in the document itself, yeah, thanks, Amber. I appreciate that. And so what you can see up on the x-axis, right, the row above, you can see these different competencies. We didn't expect the teachers in our study to necessarily master these different competencies, but we did try to move the needle. We tried to move them beyond novice to intermediate to advanced, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a really helpful way that we could also evaluate what they learned as a result of the work that they were doing in each module. And so then on the left, on the y-axis, you can see the column, the different competencies here. So we took those 5 R's, and then we just tried to build language that would allow us the ability to assess the work that they were turning in, and to also anticipate how we could then scaffold their proficiency or their competence to the next level. All right.
And one thing too with this, well, I think it's been really helpful for us, and also hopefully it'll be helpful for instructors to evaluate where they're at. We're also thinking this can be a great tool for administrators and teacher educators to help know where, like to have a baseline, where people might start out and where you can get them to maybe after a month, a day. For example, I think that's kind of a challenge too. Sometimes we don't know where we can take people, especially if we're not working with them every day.
Yeah, and again, we're really interested beyond just the awareness. How can they put, right, the skill set to use? Are they able to do it? And then to be able to to pull out, or to identify rather, what are the specific things that are getting in their way of being able to move from a novice level, right, of remixing, for example, to more intermediate level. And that was really important to the work that we do, specifically related to teacher education or teacher development. So, all right, we'll continue on with the results and show you specifically the results from those last two questions that we're interested in. So do they become more proficient by the end of the program? So you can go on to the next slide. And you can see here that by and large they do, or at least they get to. So you can see here in the green is a novice level, in the blue is an intermediate level, and the red is an advanced level. And I think it's quite interesting to see too that the revise area, and we can touch on this, we're really trying to focus on the redistribution element for today in the presentation. But if you had questions related to revise and remix, what we found actually was that remixing was the stage where teachers presented more autonomy and were more empowered, because we were able to give them ownership or agency over their activity. They were remixing it. They were challenged to go and find another resource to improve upon it. And that was really the stage where we saw that change. And as you can see here, there most of the teachers presented intermediate, if not advanced level competence there. In terms of redistribution, you can see also that there was more even distribution, right? We did have a couple of teachers that needed a lot more work, again, related to digital literacy barriers, and we're going to touch on that in the conclusions. But by and large, teachers were successful, and a lot of that is related to some of the implications that we'll get to. I don't know if this is interesting for you, but in our state, which is rural, we didn't talk about that a lot, but it certainly is a real constraint. We're in the Mountain West region of the US, and so a lot of our teachers are geographically isolated, and we were really interested in understanding, is there a difference in their competence by those regions? And what is interesting to note is that the rural teachers, we think, had a lot of success here in terms of engagement and their ability, because, and this came through the semi-structured interviews, this was the first professional development opportunity they were ever given. And so thanks to the grant through the NEH, we were able to give them stipends, and we were able to give them a credit, professional development for completing the course. So we're really enthused by what we see in their ability to actually not just grow in their knowledge, but also applied ability to do this work. And that was promising also for areas where teachers don't have a lot of support. So, all right, in the next slide, in terms of barriers. So again, we were interested in trying to understand also we used that rubric. It was really helpful for us, again, in identifying, okay, why are the teachers not able to get beyond a novice level here? Or why are they stuck in intermediate, right? Even though we went over this in the module and we worked with them and gave them feedback. And so we were trying to figure out or determine those barriers. But also too, to characterize what they gained. And the findings here, you'll see, so just go through those rather quick, sorry, yeah, and then get to the next one. So yeah, thank you. So we put here, we wanted to include these in case you were interested, because I know that those of us that are doing this work, we're all really, really wanting to know, okay, what happened with the revise, the retaining, the reusing, the remixing, even though this presentations focused on the last R here in OEP. It's there, and if you have questions, we'll address those at the end. But in terms of redistribution, what we found to be so compelling for teachers, especially, so remember that 77%, according to Bayview Analytics, are creating their own materials anyway. And what we found was that the teachers that were participating in this project were not afraid of sharing. In fact, they were really encouraged that there was a platform that would take their work and host it and share it out. they didn't know where to find that platform. And really, it was a way for them to connect with others. And this was especially salient for those teachers that were already geographically or content related isolated. And what I mean by that is, because we work in the field of language development, we might have a teacher who is the only, in this case, French K-6 teacher in her school. And so it was a way for her to share those materials with other people who might be in a very similar but niche area of the content. And so the other thing that we found in terms of barriers was that while teachers want to share their work, they really do need help in being able to publish those materials online. And so that brings us to the next part, which I think is probably what you all are very excited to hear, which is what's the practical implication? How do we do this? And so on the next slide, we'll see here conclusions and implications. So if you can go advance the slide one more, Amber, for me. Thank you. So the key takeaways is that ideation and articulation is not the problem. We found that the teachers, and if you work with K-12 teachers, you know this, they know their content, they know their students, and this is one of the things I think we're really passionate about promoting in terms of a social justice standpoint, is that these teachers are experts in the discipline. They know, they're very cued into the relationship that they've built with their students, and they're eager to apply that, their content knowledge in the materials that they're creating, but they just don't have the time to do this. And the thing that's really keeping them are kind of like at the beginning point, the access point of the materials, and at the concluding point. So if we think of those R's, right, the being able to retain, they don't know what OER repositories they should access. They get very overwhelmed by that. And then on the back end of it, once they've gone through all of that and they have something to share, they're very nervous about how to put that online, and sometimes they're unsure about copyright, or they don't know, how to make something from maybe the great idea in their mind and some notes on a paper to something that's really attractive or able to be used by other teachers, that it's polished. So that was the first thing. It's really just the time and giving them the time and honoring the work that they do to be able to see that through to be published. And then the second thing, which we touched on before, is that digital self-efficacy is lacking. So a lot of the teachers that we worked with were still very shy about, they felt a lack of confidence in terms of being able to download things, to be able to share it, to put it into a slide deck properly. And I think we're still making a lot of assumptions that because, like Amber alluded to earlier, because that they've taught in emergency remote teaching, they just automatically learned this skill set. They really have learned an emergency skill set about how to do and how to survive, but there's still really only a lot of teachers that we were working with are still very competent only in their social media practices or the things that they do on the day-to-day. Extending that out into a new sphere like OER feels intimidating for them.
And also for them to learn how to do it efficiently, I think, is another thing too. So they might be able to do it, but it might take a really long time.
Yeah.
And I think that relating back to the barriers, right? Time, as you say, time to polish is an issue, but also time to just kind of learn how to do the stuff can also prevent them from engaging.
Yeah. And so this is, our last takeaway goes into the implications on the next slide, but we really believe that higher ed has a role to play in making these barriers, like helping mitigate these barriers and making this important work sustainable in the long term. So on the next slide, the implications, we've seen a lot of success with the model that we created in the Pathways Project, and Amber's going to review over that in the next slide, and talk to you specifically about the role undergraduates have played in terms of being OER editors to really team up with and collaborate and support these teachers. And again, to the point here is that to build professional development materials that keep the process simple and efficient. That's really the goal. That seems to be the biggest hang up for K-12 teachers. Can I do this, and can I do it quickly? I have these great ideas, but I just don't have time. And so on the next slide, we're going to put another slide here or rather repeat the slide that we showed you at the beginning, because it really, oh, sorry, Amber, you're going to talk about this. I'm getting ahead of myself.
That's okay. No, but I think it's a great idea, Kelly, for us to take a moment and recap the community of practice model. Now that you've heard a little bit about us and the study, let's just kind of just look at these 5 pieces again, and then I'm going to talk to you specifically about the OER editors, and then one or two things that we have in terms of suggestions for you. But the OER editors are interdisciplinary. So they come not only are they language majors, but we have graphic design students, we have biology students, we have all kinds of different students who either have they're native speakers, or they have interest in language and culture, or they want to grow their professional toolkit, and they're looking for that experiential learning while they're still in college. And so they are really the folks that are helping to drive forward the work of the pre-service teachers. And I'll give you more details on that in just a second. But conversation assistants, they are like the teaching assistants. So if you were in a math or a biology class or an English class, it could be a TA who is trying out these activities in small groups and then getting feedback and reporting back. And that's really key for us too, because it's one thing to create an activity, it's another thing to implement it. And the more we implement it, the more we learn. So again, these activities, that's a beautiful thing about OER. We've been doing a lot of these activities since 2018. And so there's just this constant iterative cycle of trying them, getting feedback, making them better, updating them. And so they really start to feel polished after a while. Again, the pre-service teachers, they are not only learning about OER in their classrooms, but they are also taking it to the K-12 classroom, working with their mentor teachers to show them about OER. And then we have in-service teachers and lead teachers who are not only creating OER, but they're also helping those pre-service teachers to implement the OER in their classroom.
Yeah, and this is really important to us to share this work, and we were able to present at OE Global, but also sorry, if you can go back to the slide, Amber, just really quickly. Also here in Open Ed, because we want this to get to other disciplines. We've had other content areas at Boise State University reach out to us because they've seen the work that we've been doing in terms of community engagement and serving a big need in our K-12 communities. And they want to know, how do they do this? And really, there are some key pieces here that I think are very replicable for a myriad of other content. And we've been able to see that not only does this work, but we really think that this is the key to the long-term sustainability. And it's not, again, it's truly this symbiotic relationship where the students are getting to apply their skill set, they're getting to learn, work collaboratively, but then we're being able to see and learn from the teachers who are using the activities. And we have this feedback mechanism, like Amber said, to make it iterative, to make it better. So we're keen to share that model so that other people can take it and adapt it.
Yeah. So here on the left-hand side, you'll see just a handful of our undergraduate students, but they really work to polish and publish the materials. And I think that, again, that's one of the barriers too, is teachers sometimes have really great ideas and they can get them on paper, but when it comes to finessing and making the slide decks look great, or even including things that are like going to really resonate with students in terms of pop culture or other types of visual elements, the students really get that and they do a great job. They also help to do things like making sure that the images are inclusive and diverse, to make sure that there's proper attribution. They're really champions, and they do so much work behind the scenes to make sure that the activities are truly open. And not only that, they are also able to create foundational activities and publish them to OER Commons and Pressbooks. So you'll see a large collection of the activities that are in the repository were actually created by students. And they get feedback from the language instructors, they get feedback from Kelly and myself, but they have such great ideas. And we often find from teachers too, that's another barrier, is that like coming up with the ideas sometimes takes a really long time. So having something that is just like a springboard that they can launch from is really helpful for teachers, because they can get in there and they can start to customize. And then one of the questions I get a lot about too is like, how are these students compensated for their work? Yes, they receive compensation either through work study. Sometimes we've had funding from grants, so we have been able to pay like summer students some salaries. But we also have a lot of students who get credit through internship, and that's a creative thing that you can think about too. Is there a class that you could create in your discipline where you could maybe give students academic credit? And we are almost at time. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So the last thing I want to share with you is this submission worksheet. So we've asked teachers to submit their work to us in many different ways, and this has evolved over time. We've had them do anything from putting things directly into OER Commons to filling out a Google form, and this is kind of the latest iteration. So we'd love to share that with you. And Kelly, if you don't mind, we can put the link in the chat. But what we tried to do is just make a very simplistic submission worksheet that helps us to get the information that we need. And then we say, we'll take this and we'll polish it, we'll publish it, list you as the author, and then get your final go ahead before we can turn it on, so to speak. And so we've had really great success. Kelly's using this with some of her teacher education students, and the teachers who used it in the cohort, it seemed to work really well. So we're excited to continue using this and refining it, and we hope that it might be helpful for other disciplines. And I promised you the press book where this could be hopefully we'll probably do another presentation on this, because it could really be something that other disciplines could remix and revise. It's great because teachers are not only learning about OER, they're also getting some discipline specific PD as they go through and learn about the 5R. So I'd love to share that with you. And then I think, for the sake of making sure that we get to questions, I think we'll skip the activity, and we would just love to open it up for questions. And I'm going to go ahead and just turn off screen sharing so it's a little bit more personable. There we go.
Thank you all for your comments too. I really appreciate it, but I don't know if anyone has a question or.
Anita asked a bit further up in the question about what role there might be for school librarians.
Yeah, I really loved this question, and I was trying to type it's a response while finishing up the presentation here, but I think that it would be helpful to hear from you about what you think, what ideas you have. I mean, that's clearly a gap. We haven't worked. We've had some changes, and we had OER librarians at our institution who have since left, and we were really excited about partnering with them. And so there's been some structural challenges there that have been unfortunate, but we did have a librarian, or we do have 2 librarians on our advisory board, and that's been really helpful. But I don't know. I would love to hear from you, Anita or Christina.
Yeah, I think everything I hear when I talk about these kinds of concepts in my own work and talk about higher ed outreach to K-12 is people keep emphasizing, don't forget the school librarians. And so the school librarians have expertise in information literacy, retrieval, description, some degree of information design. I think, yeah, I'm not one, so I can't speak for them, but I think there's a place, and I'm just not sure what that role might be. It would be great to hear from some school librarians. I don't know if we have any in this group.
That just makes me think too. I mean, Amber and I do a lot of consulting, or we'll do workshops with our K-12 schools, and it never occurred to me to ask the district coordinator to invite a school librarian who could be a support. And so it's very helpful. In fact, we have a couple coming up. So that's a very helpful comment to be more inclusive, because we often think about it in the role parallel to Amber. She's the mastermind behind all of this as our lab director in world languages. But a lot of the schools that we partner with, they don't have a lab director. They don't have anyone that could support this, no instructional design consultant. And so the librarian would be a person that could be a support. And that's a fantastic suggestion. Thank you.
Sure.
Just as a follow-up, this is from Colorado PK-12 OER. We just tapped into our state library network and our local public library networks. There's 2 of them. And we have found by far and away that they have been the most supportive and helpful about being able to message this out and linking into networks and systems that they already have. So yeah, I highly support any relationship with librarians. School librarians typically tends to be like the easiest route towards messaging.
Yeah, and kind of not surprised by that, but I don't know why it didn't occur to us. So that's super helpful to I think we've been trying to spend, as you all know, working with K through 12, especially if you're in a higher ed situation, we constantly said the work that we were doing was scrappy. We were trying to do the most we could with very limited funding, and trying to bridge two institutions that often are very siloed. Is really challenging. So that structural support is exactly what we need to help keep this work sustainable. So thank you.
It looks like Amy just shared an awesome resource in the chat too that I would recommend checking out. I agree that the K through 12 environment is really confusing, and it's so different in different places too. I know Kelly and I, when we were first getting started, we learned so much too about local control and how that affects how curriculum is decided upon. So yeah, and then I only imagine in Canada too, I don't know if we have any Canadian folks in here too, but I imagine that it's probably different there too. So
all right.
Yeah.
I've saved the chat so I can follow up we can follow up with all of you. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Christina, for hosting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christina.